we still have to gather requirements. We still have to build products. We still have to understand our customers, launch and release products. But you'll notice down below in the continuous innovation era, there is a lot of things happening very close together, and that's why it's continuous. And of course, it wouldn't be unfair to kind of ignore that we are entering into a new era of artificial intelligence where the pace with which we build products is only going to accelerate. Some of the changes that we see today that weren't prevalent before is this. As we have reduced the complexity of building products, we have gotten tools like the internet, cloud computing, and now AI. The question is no longer, can we build something? I'm not going to oversimplify and say everything is buildable, but most things today, given enough time, money, and effort, can be built. The bigger question today is, should we build these things? The markets have gotten bigger, but at the same time, there are a lot more products chasing the same number of customers. Customers today have a lot more choices, and so it is on us, the innovators, to make sure that we build the right products from the start. And so that's kind of what has changed in here. The way I like to describe the unfair advantage in this continuous innovation era is it's dictated by speed of learning. If you can outlearn your competition, you stand to build a product that gets attention. And if you can do that continuously, this is where you see your business model thrive and grow. And so that is, in some ways, the essence of continuous innovation. So I'll kind of talk a bit about what needs to change. So the problem with speed of learning is that when we are going fast, there is a lot of uncertainty. And so the traditional business planning processes that we are used to no longer work when we are trying to go fast in these uncertain times. Typically, when you are asked, if you're an innovator in a larger company or even a startup trying to raise funding, when you have a big idea, we're often asked for these artifacts, the 30-page business plan or the financial forecast or the product roadmaps. The problem with these is not that people are lazy and no longer want to do them, but because we are going really fast, a lot of the information to put these plans together, we don't have access to. A lot of these things are simply unknowable. And so this is what I kind of attribute as the number 2 killer of ideas, is they don't even get started because it's hard to put these elaborate plans together and they don't seem very solid. And so they don't oftentimes get picked. Even if you do manage to get your plan approved and green lighted, we run into the execution challenge. The early stages in this uncertain world is usually without revenue and profit. And so the only way we measure progress is execution speed. But if you are starting with a flawed or not well-analyzed plan because you moved pretty quickly, it's very hard to execute a flawed plan. And what ends up happening is we build a lot of stuff, but when we realize we have built something on time and on budget that the market doesn't want, that isn't the right progress metric. So is building something nobody wants on time, on budget progress? I don't think so. The other challenge with this heavyweight governance process is we can only execute a few big ideas at a time. And so because we do this elaborate upfront analysis, only the safer ideas typically get through, and we are not tackling the more risky, innovative ideas. And if you aren't disrupting yourself, the business model will get disrupted. It will just happen outside your building, outside your company. So someone else will disrupt you. So what I want to focus in on is we have known this for a while. If you notice the timeline, 2010 is when a lot of these lean concepts and continuous innovation ideas started to percolate. A lot of people viscerally understand them, but when we look to practice, we don't see a lot of people doing this rigorously, and that's what I want to focus in on. There are a few mindsets. What I have found over the years is that it's not about knowing the methodology or knowing the merits, but it's about embodying the right mindsets before even the skill sets to put some of these principles to practice. So I'll go back to this quote that I mentioned. So when there's lots of uncertainty, we can't build elaborate static plans. We need something a lot more dynamic. This is where we begin to see a shift from the old world heavyweight business planning tools, the waterfall process, the analyze, plan, execute model, to something a lot more, I'll say, agile and continuous. we start to use more lightweight business modeling tools. And I know many of you are probably familiar with tools like the business model canvas and the lean canvas. That's what I mean, and we'll kind of talk about that a bit more. We use those models to more continuously embody a model prioritized test process. And so I'll visually show you what that process looks like, and then we'll open up for some questions. So in this model, we don't have the luxury of taking 3 months or 6 months or 9 months to build an elaborate forecast model or an elaborate business plan. We start with a very lightweight deconstruction of our idea into these building blocks. So what I'm showing here is the lean canvas. If you don't know what this is, think of it as a one-page business plan. And the idea is not perfection, but really trying to get an understanding of your key assumptions and your key beliefs. I look at this as a bunch of building blocks, just like we have grown up, maybe some of you have, playing with Lego blocks or building blocks and building some simple models like this one. As you get more advanced, you can take those same simple building blocks and build more elaborate models like this one. The same is true with tools like the business model canvas or the lean canvas, is we can begin to describe some very simple business models like lemonade stands. And we can use the same concepts because every business in the world has customers. Customers have problems. We build solutions to solve them. There's go-to-market strategies that we capture on our channels, or we optimize our cost structure and pricing. That's where you find revenue streams. So a lot of these basic building blocks are universal. And so we can use these same models to describe more elaborate models. And this is the first mindset in the framework, is we have to start thinking about our business model, not just the solution, but the business model as the true product of what we are building as innovators. So that's the first mindset to get out there. Now, the reason I like to start with this one is that we are all generally pretty good at building products. And when we build complex products, we don't start with the easy stuff. We usually start with the more riskier things. And that's the second mindset here. For a lot of us, as I mentioned before, given enough time, money, and effort, we can build what we want to build, but that usually isn't what's riskiest. What's riskiest is something else entirely on the canvas. The way to kind of visualize this is, if you have played this game of Jenga, what we are trying to do is remove all the weakest blocks. If we have an idea, we want to poke at the weakest links and eliminate them first, and that is this mindset of tackling what's riskiest. So what we have left is much stronger and it stays standing. Now, most products, most early stage products fail because of this reason, is we rush to build something and we end up wasting too much needless time, money, and effort on building the wrong product entirely. Oftentimes, this is because we don't understand our needs, our customers' needs as clearly as we need to. But there's another reason why this happens, and I'll visualize this on this slide. This is what I call the innovator's bias, is as humans, we talk a lot about, falling in love with the problem, but problems are uncomfortable. Even when we are chasing customer problems, we quickly gravitate to solutions. And so do our customers, by the way. They too also don't like to live in the world of problems. They want to jump to solutions quickly. The problem is twofold. Most first solutions don't work. And two, we generally think they will. So we tend to fall in love with our solutions. And this is where very quickly this bias takes over the entire business model. We make it our mission to bring our solutions to life without rigorously testing the assumptions around it. And that's how this bias manifests. And pretty soon we are spending that needless time, money, and effort building what people don't really want. So the third mindset I want to share with you is this notion of falling in love with the problem, not just your solution. The way I like to think of this is, when we start with solutions, we are starting with the key, and solutions are very important. I am a product person. I love building products. I love solutions, but solutions are a key to a door. And if you don't know what door that is going to open, that's a big challenge. That is a solution looking for a problem, which is a much harder thing to do than if you flip the perspective around. If we instead start with an audience or a group of people struggling with a problem, key building or solution building becomes a lot more obvious and a lot more easier. So it's a very subtle mindset shift, but again, it's easier to say than to put to practice, but that is what this mindset shift is about. Finally, once we start to prioritize what's riskiest, we use experiments to start testing those risks. This is where we bring in this mindset of data over opinions. So in God we trust, all others bring data. And this is another way of saying that we are ultimately using an evidence-based decision-making process. So nothing wrong with having strong opinions, but the best product people, the best innovators I found are those that have very strong opinions, but are the first ones to question them. They are the first ones to test them in search of something better. So if you have a strong opinion, use an experiment, use evidence, not opinions, to test whether your assumptions are correct. And if it isn't, what you'll see here is very much this entrepreneurial method that is essentially the scientific method adapted to the entrepreneurial method. When we look in the world of science, many scientists follow a very similar process of modeling their hypotheses, their theories, then using prioritization to test the most surprising or unknown aspects of their theory. And then from the experiments they run, they test that theory. And if the theory fails, it is not the fault of the experiment. It's usually the fault of an assumption in the model. And so they fix the model. And that is this iterative process. So what I'm showing here is a more iterative way of treating your business model as the product and then identifying what's riskiest, using experiments to inform your understanding of the risks. And the faster you can go from left to right, the faster your speed of learning. The final thing I'll kind of mention here is the notion of outputs over outcomes. So I go back to in the early stage, even when you are practicing continuous innovation, we still don't have revenue and profit to track because all products, when we are building them, require investment. We are going to go through the negative J curve where we are spending more time, money, and effort, sometimes building a product, bringing it to life. And so revenue is zero, profit is even negative. And so we can't use those metrics. And so we need to think of something else. This is where thinking about this question, what is the one thing that both your stakeholders and the innovators in your company, yourself and other makers in your team want? My answer to that question is growth, or the other way of calling, the other label for that is traction. If we can build something where there is traction in our business, that is evidence that something is working. And ideally, we want to see a hockey stick like the one I'm showing here. It doesn't start off that way. As you can see, there's a flat portion. But even in that left flat portion, there is progress that we can measure. Now, what is traction? So traction isn't revenue and profit, because remember, those are not going to show up for several months in the product. But what we can measure are other leading indicators. Things like customer engagement, things like your pipeline, your sales pipeline, things like your interest that customers generate when they raise their hand and say they'd like to have that meeting to learn about the value proposition you shared with them. That is that is a measure of traction. And so we have gotten pretty good at breaking traction into a set of leading indicators, measuring those, and that is the first sign that something is working. So if we get no traction, we know we're on the wrong track. But if you get some traction, we can begin to measure progress towards the goal, and eventually we build products that our customers want. So in closing, I want to share this with you because I know many of you are probably in larger companies, and I'd like to end with this kind of message here, which is, in theory, a large company should never fail against a smaller startup or a smaller company, because you have access to customers, you have a lot more people, you have a lot more resources, you have typically a lot more money than a startup does. A startup usually dies because they fail to find enough customers. But what I have observed from my work with larger companies, and I've worked in larger companies myself, is the reasons the larger companies struggle is because they oftentimes create barriers of their own to talking to customers. We don't talk to our customers enough. And when we do, we don't often spend the requisite time really getting to root causes. We kind of leave things at the solution level or the surface level. Or even if we do get to root causes, by the time it moves from the requirements gathering team to the people doing the work, it's like the elephant whisper game. A lot of things get lost in the handoff. So that's usually what I find to be the biggest struggle. To be able to overcome this, you have to get outside your comfort zone. You have to kind of break down the silos, and we can, again, in the questions, maybe talk about some tactics for doing this. When I first moved myself from Waterfall to Agile, I moved into a war room like this one. Maybe some of you have had a similar experience, and it felt very uncomfortable in the beginning because I didn't know why I was being asked to leave my comfortable cubicle and being moved into a fishbowl where everyone could see what I was doing and working, and it felt very uncomfortable for a while until it actually began to make sense. So the early days of Agile felt like micromanagement, but it was really a new paradigm, a new way of working. And the early days of continuous innovation feels much the same way. When you are leaving in the middle of day to go and talk to customers, that doesn't feel like work, but that is how you're going to break through and find those needs and wants of your customers, those requirements that help you build better products. So I'm going to end here from a presentation perspective, but happy to open up to some questions and take your questions.
Okay, thank you very much.